Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Schumacher Conversation. It's a great honor to be here to moderate it today. So I want to welcome you all to the fourth Schumacher Conversation with John Todd and Greg Watson. My name is Natasha Hulst, and I have been with the Schumacher Center since early 2019. My focus at the Schumacher Center is strengthening the commons, especially with regards to land, agroecology, conservation and climate through community land trusts. Since 2018, I have also worked regularly at the Biomimicry Institute, and I am one of the founders of Drawdown Europe. For the past 20 years, I've spent searching and developing solutions to the challenges, ecological solutions to the challenges that society faces. This is why today, this is a really exciting day for me because I'm here with two gentlemen who have laid the groundwork for this fair and ecological society that we need to transition towards. Hi, John and Greg. I'll just quickly introduce both of you and start off with John. John has been a pioneer in the field of ecological design and engineering for over 5 decades. He's the founder and president of John Todd Ecological Design. He is Professor Emeritus and Distinguished Lecturer at the University of Vermont's Rubenstein School and Fellow of the Gund Institute for Ecological Economics at UVM. He's also founder and president of Ocean Arcs International, a non-profit research and education organization, and co-founder of the New Alchemy Institute, a research center that has done pioneering investigations into organic agriculture, aquaculture, and bioshelters. His numerous honors include 2008 Buckminster Fuller Award, and he's the author of several books. His latest book was published in 2019, and the title is Healing Earth, an Ecologist's Journey of Innovation and Environmental Stewardship. John began his ecological design work in 1971 when he was co-founded the New Alchemy Institute together with his wife and colleague, Nancy Jack Todd, with a mission to restore the lands, protect the seas, and inform the earth stewards. He began designing biomes and bioshelters, structures for cultivation of food and other biological products utilizing sunlight and solar heating. John and Nancy also founded Ocean Arcs International in 1981, and in 1986 they created their first they began their work on the first eco machines, living technologies designed to grow foods, generate fuels, treat waste, and restored impaired environments. This work was described in his '94 book, From Eco-Cities to Living Machines, and continues to this day. We're also joined by Greg Watson, my friend and colleague at the Schumacher Center. He is Director of Policy and Systems Design. His work currently focuses on community food systems and dynamics between local and geo-economic systems. Greg and John have been great friends and have been working together since Greg joined New Alchemy Institute, first as Education Director and later as Executive Director. He has also served as the first Executive Director of the Massachusetts Renewable Energy Trust and was Executive Director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, a multicultural grassroots organizing and planning organization for which he initiated one of the nation's first urban agricultural programs. In 2005, he founded the US Offshore Wind Collaborative. In 2015, he founded the Cuba-US Ecological Network. So, welcome both, Greg and John. This year, we celebrate the 40 years of Schumacher Lectures, and to do this, we decided to set up this series of conversations to see how we can provide a platform to the speakers of the past 40 years. We've had these, in the past 40 years, we've had these lectures, and they're brilliant ideas that we can now see have stood the test of time. So we've asked them to reflect and revisit these past lectures in the light of these current economic, social, and political and ecological realities. If you have questions during the course of this webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat and we will get to them later on. First of all, I wanted to ask John to take 10 minutes to reflect on his lecture from 2001 and how his work has evolved since then. What did you expect, and how have things kind of developed in the past 20 years since your lecture? I was reading your lecture and it struck me that it was in 2001. That was, of course, also it was October 2001, so also a very turbulent time. And here we are now in 2020. Interestingly, your lecture was called Reinventing the Future. So yeah, here we are in the future.
Well, I'm still working on it. First of all, Natasha, it's wonderful to get to know you and have you convene all of this. And I just want to say at the very outset is Greg, of all the people I know, is certainly my favorite or at the very top of the list. And it's a great pleasure and honor, and our lives are getting increasingly intertwined as we get older. And I think it's because we both have a sense of the sense of the need to move now, and to move with as much force as we can give it into helping to transfer a society that is capable of stabilizing climate, capable of being equitable, and capable of restoring the great ecologies upon which we depend. We both have this incredible sense of urgency. And if you go back to that 2001 lecture, what's interesting is that by that time, we started in 1969, and but by that time, all the pieces are starting to come into play. We're doing some, quite remarkable water quality improvement work in China. We're building a ecological industrial park in the Intervale in Burlington. We're dealing with we're trying to protect Chesapeake Bay by treating the waste from a huge slaughterhouse that is, its wastes are in violation of the regulations and are getting into the bay and harming it. All of the pieces, the sort of energy, water, food, environmental repair, they're all starting to come together, and each year they kind of add new layers to each other and inform us that, well, basically to tell us that we're on the right track. We're at that time we're working at a polluted site in a town on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, which has got devastating chemicals getting into the groundwater, and finding cost-effective ecological ways to deal with this huge problem, both here, but then it began to spread slowly to other places around the world, Brazil, Australia, and so on and so forth. And there is a sense then that we have the ideas and we have the tools to create this beautiful new world that we dream about, and that we're doing it on a small scale. Last fall, the British publication the Guardian and also the Observer, did an evaluation of the effect of 50 years of the New Alchemy Institute on ideas in various parts of the world. It was a special issue dedicated to that. And what they said in their review is that the ideas were all in place, or beginning to be in place, by the first Earth Day. Why did they not take off? Why were we kind of anachronisms? You know, what happened? And my sense, and I think this is what I want to convey, is that this was kind of like the R&D phase, where it was small enough and we could make mistakes if we wanted to. I mean, if we not wanted to, but did. And so many good things were coming out of it. In the last phase of period since the lecture, what I'm attempting to do is to take my current 8 or 9 projects in 5 or 6 countries and try and amplify them and expand them and link them to others, so that we have are working on a scale that we couldn't dream of in 2001. But now we know we can dream about it and have to, because of the necessity. We've lost a couple of decades in the transition to an ecological based society. Of course, the pandemic is influencing all of this. It hovers over this whole conversation today and all the other conversations that you will be hosting, Natasha. But they're not necessarily, one is not going to eliminate the other. The positive vision is really, as you say, taking root itself. I think that's probably enough from me for this period of time, unless you have a question.
Well, maybe we could, we could have a few questions maybe to start now. So what you were really saying just now, John, as well, is that a lot of these projects that you discussed, were they have been ongoing since then, the past 20 years. I mean, these types of projects do not happen overnight.
No, there's well over 100 eco machines in various places that work around the world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, after this, we'll go back to questions and also have the conversation between Greg and yourself. And I'll just move over to Greg now. And as I was just reading your lecture, and we've known each other for some time, but I never read your lecture before, trying to prepare for this day. And I read it, and I kept having to check the date, thinking it really fit with the time that we're in now and all of the things that you discussed. Because when was the lecture again, Greg?
1997.
Yeah, 1997. So in 1997, you were already talking about all of these things. And this is when I was just starting. Well, actually, I was still studying at the time. And I wish someone had already told me these things at the time. I hadn't had to spend all these years trying to look for these types of solutions. So yeah, I was really taken by it, and it really resonated on a lot of levels, but still it also made me feel a little bit sad. Like John just said now, it's like we already had these solutions at the turn of the century. So yeah, I was just why has it taken so long, it feels like in some ways, but maybe that's how long it has to take. So, exactly. So, Greg, over to you, and I'm interested to hear how you think it's evolved in the last 20 years.
Thank you, Natasha, and John, thank you for agreeing to endure me for this 90 minutes. I echo everything you said about our relationship, and I will say that the two organizations I work for that probably had more influence on my life than any others were the New Alchemy Institute and the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. I'm going to talk about both of those. And I also just want to begin, though, by saying I think we talk about the solutions already having existed. One of the things I've learned over the years from my other guru, Buckminster Fuller, is that ideas have gestation periods. And there are different gestation periods for different sectors. It takes time for new ideas because there's always usually some resistance to change, right? And then through practice, things sort of happen. So I think we need to have that sense of urgency, and I'm impatient, but I think if we can also just maybe understand a little bit about that process, we can realize that we may not be as far off track as we think we are. So I will say that 1997, I was full of hope. This was, I had talked about the wisdom that builds communities, and my talk was focused on a number of things that had happened, but it really was about the culmination of a journey for me that began in 1967, and that I thought had sort of culminated with my work at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, although it didn't culminate there, but it really did hit a certain apex. And the journey began when I was a senior in high school and ready to take my first trip out of Cleveland, Ohio, where I became an accidental environmentalist by virtue of the fact that I lived on the banks of Lake Erie and the Cuyahoga River. And, the Lake Erie had been declared biologically dead because of so much pollution, and the Cuyahoga River, some of you probably know, was made infamous by, among others, Randy Newman, whose song Burn On Big River was about the Cuyahoga that was so full of flammable pollutants that the surface would occasionally erupt on fire, and smoke filling the air of Cleveland. So when I entered Tufts University my freshman year, I was gung-ho. I was this I understood environment even though I came from the city. And I think, as you know, or probably could guess, I was sort of an anomaly back then, African-American environment. It just wasn't a thing. And I was called on the carpet by my colleagues at the Tufts chapter of the Afro-American Society, wanting to know how it could be that a Black American during this time, remember 1967, civil rights movement, Vietnam War, women's rights movement, there were just a bunch of things. It was tumultuous, almost not maybe as tumultuous as today, but it certainly was an upheaval. And they felt that they hit me with an argument that took me aback. And they said that they would not feel so bad if the environmental movement, this was conveyed to me, was merely irrelevant to the cause of African Americans. I said, well, I said, what do you mean? They said, well, we think it's worse than irrelevant. We think it's sinister and counterproductive. And I didn't understand. And they said, well, listen to the slogans, Greg: limited growth, no growth. How do we achieve any sort of economic equality within that scenario? We don't see how we fit in. We don't see how we can close the gap. And the wealth gap was big back then. I think it's even grown in subsequent years. And all I can say is that I had an intuitive feeling. Intuitively, I really felt strongly that economic equality and environmental equality were compatible, but I had no intellectual argument. I didn't know how to respond. And nothing in my formal schooling had prepared me to respond. So quickly, I went underground. I discovered the Whole Earth Catalog, and tools for helping people, individuals and communities achieve some measure of self-control and self-reliance over their basic needs: food, energy, and shelter. And that really was compelling to me. And as I opened up the first new Whole Earth Catalog, on that left-hand page, there was this picture of this guy, Buckminster Fuller, and he talked about this concept of doing more with less and synergy. And all of a sudden, it seemed to me there was some way to think about how we could sort of transcend that, what I at least now kind of feel is a false dichotomy between, again, economic development. So when I had a chance to, I was actually working, teaching high school, was visiting the Department of Agriculture. A woman by the name of Susan Redlick, as I was leaving, I actually wanted to borrow a film to show to my class, and she handed me an announcement. And the announcement was a job description for education director at a place called the New Alchemy Institute. Now, this was back, 1980. No Google, no internet. What is this place? What is New Alchemy Institute? So I had to go and start digging around, and I found some information about it. I showed it to my friends, and they looked at me and said, I don't know, Greg, it looks like it might be a commune. You sure you want to go there? I mean, there are, people in shorts and long hair, and they're up on windmills. But I went for the interview, and it was the best move at that point that I'd ever made, because I was on these 12 acres, as you mentioned, founded by John and Nancy, Todd, Bill McClarney. And in this era of environmentalism, when most people were talking about, and rightfully so, absolutely rightfully so, what was wrong with the current system, fossil fuels and chemical fertilizers and pesticides or herbicides, there were no one in the scene was saying, okay, we see the problem, let's come up with the solutions. And that's what was happening on these 12 acres. And I have to say that that gave me the confidence and sort of the feeling that there is a way out of here. And so it was years later when I became the executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. I guess that's where I felt like, and I mentioned this to John and Nancy every time, almost every day at New Alchemy. I said, this stuff has got to be transferred to the city. And they were really one of the few who understood you're right. And then of course, John and Nancy wrote the book that sort of talked about adapting these technologies to urban environments. But I can't emphasize more strongly how important it is not to just know these things theoretically, but to have seen them work, so that I could say with confidence, I know that you can raise enough food on the 10th of an acre of land to feed 13 people 3 vegetable portions a day for a year. Yes, there are caveats of things you have to do, but the fact that you can do that without chemical fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides. So at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, here was a community that was hungry for solutions and ready to think outside the box, or the boxes. And it was interesting to me that while I had served some time in state government, and it was like beating my head against the wall, but we did, John and I, together, Mass Technology Collaborative, did some work there and got people to kind of soften up and accept some of these ideas that were pushing conventional wisdom. But the readiness with which the community, African American, Cape Verdean, white, and Latino, all poor, desperately poor, at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, welcome these concepts, because they saw the empowering part of being able to take some control over meeting your basic needs. They saw that as real wealth. So anyway, so at Dudley Street, I had this opportunity. Here was this neighborhood. We were a cauldron. We were doing this incredible work. I'm going to end this part of it just by saying that this community was able to address and once again sort of blow up these false dichotomies that existed among professional planners. I mean, professional urban planners for decades. One of them being, you can't, this almost necessary coupling of gentrification and displacement. You can't bring up a neighborhood. Once you bring it up, you're going to force the people, a poor community, you're going to force them off the land. And what I can say is that thanks to, in part to New Alchemy, because of these, not only the technology, but because the New Alchemy network included Susan and Bob Swan, and place at the Schumacher Center that had these complementary tools, including community land trusts. And I'll get into this later, but those tools combined with what we did at Dudley, building a 10,000 square foot greenhouse and urban gardens, said to me, this is the future. We can see this. And so now here we are in 2020, and I remain hopeful, but like John, now it's time to really, we've got to go from, we've got to implement, we've got to deploy. So the sense of urgency has never been greater. but I think that maybe society now seeing the flaws in our systems that the pandemic and the Black Lives Movement and others have laid bare are ready for the transition, and we can only hope so. So I think that's part of what we have to sort of take as being hopeful in these incredibly difficult times.
Thanks, Greg and John. Thanks very much for reflecting on the conversations from all these years back. And as I said before, they're still, so relevant to these times at the moment. I think one of the things that you just mentioned, Greg, was very interesting. So ideas, they have a gestation period, and what really has been gestating is these ideas within society. But as you just said, more and more these faults in the system are becoming more and more clear. And so how do we now get these different groups involved? How do we move from here? What would be the next step? I guess there's many steps going on at once. Well, and also in relation to John's work.
Yeah, well, you want me to respond?
Yeah, yes, please,
Greg. It's a good question. I think part of what has to happen now is we need to get equally good at communicating what we've learned from those. And I think, there have been books that have been written. There's no question of that. Streets of Hope is a great chronicle of the history of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. But I will say that one of the reasons, not one, there are many reasons why I am excited that that my colleague Elizabeth Thompson and myself have been able to acquire the rights to resurrect Buckminster Fuller's World Game Workshop. Because I think what we now need is a way to get people excited about changing the narrative and seeing how the pieces, see what we've got are a lot of pieces and a lot of projects, and they're very exciting and they've been very successful. But I think most people who aren't directly involved in this don't have a sense of if you're not involved directly in agriculture, or not directly involved in community development, you're not involved directly in other relevant sectors that we've been talking about, you might not see how it all fits together. And so what you see are some really interesting experiments, some very interesting ideas, but what's missing, and this is sort of the key, they don't see the synergy from what happens if we can start to pull these together. That was actually the beauty of both New Alchemy, although in terms of being able to see all these systems working together, but more for me, equally, if not more important, seeing it happen in an actual community. And so here, with you've got Dudley Street, and to be able to point to a community that solved this problem of how you can gentrify a poor community without forcing people out by using a tool called the Community Land Trust, but also that challenges our concepts about, for instance, maximizing wealth. I mean, again, there are things that get lost in the discussion, but certainly the Community Land Trust is important, and certainly the fact, for folks who don't know, Dudley was able also to get this power of eminent domain and acquire land. Not very many other communities will be able to use the power of eminent domain, but what Dudley Street demonstrates is, but what happens if a community does have control? And what happens if they bring a different set of values to the table and saying that our goal is not to try to maximize every individual's wealth, but can we optimize community wealth through this land trust? Can we stabilize it? And can we, and I think what we discovered more than anything else is you can do a great deal to secure a community's wealth, and then you still, and within that, right, there's cooperation, and then there's a little bit of competition. The World Game, I think, is going to provide us with a venue and a tool to see how all these things fit together, right? How do you piece them together? And when you do that in a but here's the most important thing, is that the game is not telling people about this, it's encouraging them, facilitating a process where you self-discover these because you're role-playing. And in the role play, the power of the role play is the process of self-discovery. We're finding out more and more and more that a lot of people are resistant to being told by experts that this is what's good for you. And I'm a personal believer that we need the experts to do that, but we know there's some pushback. So is there a way for us to develop tools that soften that a little bit, give our experts a chance to work with some of the non-experts, but also engage in a process that leads to that self-discovery? That's not the only thing, obviously, but I do think we've got to figure out a way to, there's a dominant narrative that's out there, you know, capitalism, growth, the whole bit, GDP. And if we, and let me end with this, the mistake that we've been, not the mistake, the trap that we've fallen into is that in developing a lot of our tools, we look to the system that isn't working for us as the measure for its success. It's an economic in the sense of that tradition. Well, it probably isn't because it doesn't fit in that system. So we've got to be insistent, and that's what's so important about the work of the Schumacher Center for a new economics, that we've got to describe that new economics and show how the value derives from projects like this. And I think we're at that point that where more and more and more people, I mean, you look at what's happening with urban agriculture, Soulfire and the Urban Farming Institute, you look at around not just the country, but the world. I think now we're at the tipping point along the critical path.
Thanks, Greg. What you're really also saying, if I heard it right, is that all of these issues are connected, but we don't really see that yet. It's also not, and this is something that there'll be also, you help people to think in systems also through the World Game, for example.
And we have to make the invisible visible.
Yeah, and it's also an educational tool, but it's also to help people to use that, or to be able to solve systemic problems with this systemic thinking, learning how to think in systems. I guess that's really an important role for education as well, is that till now, systems thinking hasn't really been, maybe only for ecologists. And I'll move to you now, John. Ecologists have always learned how to think in systems, and that's why it's so important to have ecologists, I guess. John, when you just heard Greg talking about the next steps and how to move on, and how do we kind of skill these, because this is one of the questions also from the audience, is how do we skill these projects and to have more impact and larger projects? Or is that not necessarily what we need to do?
There are a couple of ways of approaching it. The first is to find some kind of metric around which you can organize your life. For example, if you're concerned for stabilizing climate, one of the first things you're going to do is get to know all about carbon and carbon dioxide, organic carbon, stable carbon, and so on. And then you begin to organize, or you design your projects and your society around this issue. And then in order to bring more and more people into the carbon story, and I use the carbon story because I think a lot of people call themselves carbon farmers because they want to store more in the soil than they exhaust into the atmosphere. So this is a great kind of organizing principle. The other thing that one needs to do, and this is one of the things that I'm working on most intensely now, and my critics might say fanatically, is that I'm trying to figure out how, as an applied ecologist, we can intervene in large, complicated systems that are under threat. And in fact, a lot of my book sort of deals with this issue, or tries to deal with it as best I understand. But for example, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, I began with colleagues to design a technology I called an ocean restorer. It was a ship. It was powered by the sun and the wind. It was a hybrid ship. It didn't use fossil fuels. But on board the ship were all of these beneficial ecological elements that were being employed by the ship to purify the water it was moving through. And you know, it was very, very exciting. We started working on some of the sub-technologies, things like algal turfs and all kinds of strange biological things that clean up water and incorporate them into this ship, who by moving through the water would clean it up. And then I began to realize, and I'm going to do it, I am involved in doing that, but I began to realize there needs to be a larger story that we can embrace. And how can we think that one of the things we would like to do would be to restore the Mississippi, or the Nile, or the Ganges, or the St. Lawrence? And I began to really intensively, especially this year, intensively investigate systems under threat. And so I began to see a way of looking at the world that I hadn't really seen before. I'll give you one very simple little example. There in the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the area around Nova Scotia, there were great fisheries, thousands of streams and rivers that hosted wild Atlantic salmon, vast populations of cod and other marine fishes. And they all started collapsing about the same time. And it's a real tragedy. And there was a professor at Dalhousie University who discovered the possible problem. Hydro-Quebec, one of the largest producers of electricity in Eastern North America, was damming all the rivers flowing into the St. Lawrence in order to produce electricity from their dams. What this fellow at Dalhousie University discovered was all those dams were interfering with the movement downstreams of minerals to create the sustenance to build the great populations of plankton, particularly phytoplankton, that supported these fisheries. In other words, he saw on this huge scale of, you know, millions of hectares, a problem which was really being devastated. And of course, it's pretty hard once you get an infrastructure for huge hydroelectric projects that help power most of New England, that there had to be some way of figuring out how to intervene so that this large-scale restoration can take place. And so the interesting point is, it was my efforts to try and reduce the cost to purify water by orders of magnitude, to reduce it, that led to beginning to discover these stories about trace minerals no longer in the environment. One of the most dramatic is the silicates, which are mostly from volcanic rock. And when these minerals, and iron is also one of them in many places, disappear, everything downstream collapses ecologically. And I discovered, by studying this whole thing, that there were people who had been working for decades on trying to figure out how the oceans work. And one of the things they figured out, and a lot of this was taking place right here in this town from where I'm talking, they found, to their horror, is that when water is polluted, as a general rule, it can only support essential organisms like phytoplankton that are basically, and they're called flagellates and dinoflagellates and so on. And that these organisms are pretty useless in building vital food chains that feed the herring and feed the salmon and feed the cod and all the rest. On the other hand, they also found that there are other organisms which could be considered beneficial, and these organisms are called diatoms. And wherever there are the great upwellings in the world and the vast fisheries, like off Peru and West Africa and other upwellings, the diatoms are the creatures that prevail. And by changing the mineral environment, it might be possible to put, let's say, a small barge load of beneficial minerals, remineralization, which is also part of the carbon story, to change and bring back the viable food webs and do this economically. This is an important issue. There are connections between Dudley Street and what I'm talking about, believe it or not. But this is an important issue because over half of the photosynthesis in the world is by phytoplankton. And the beneficial plankton, the diatoms, are producing between 75 and 80% of the photosynthesis. If they're being disrupted, like in the St. Lawrence watershed, they can't function. And the ability to produce oxygen on a worldwide scale starts to decline. So backing up, and I'm going to wrap it up here just by saying, sometimes by looking at the big, how do the world oceans work, and start at the bottom of the food, start with the rocks and then go to the plankton and so on, and you can begin to see unbelievably effective solutions cropping up. And it is so, I think, important that we now, because of the time, as Greg mentioned, the time has gone by to be able to address the world in interesting ways, like deal with the vast section of the planet that have been salted by misuse of agricultural soils, and to bring them back to life by using the less than 2,000 species of salt-loving plants, or halophytes, to try and reclaim these vast lands in all throughout the Middle East, Western Australia, you name it, all over the place. They all have inherent in them a story which allows you to engage with the solution without even having all the minutiae knowledge to figure out precisely what's going on. And so what I'm saying is that scale is very critical. And one of the things that I hope for is that we can find cooperative structures and financial structures that will allow vast investments that engage whole communities and whole regions. be able to confront regreening of places like the whole Sinai Desert at the eastern end of the Mediterranean. So I'm optimistic. I think there are deep narratives within the living world that we need to tap into, but also do it at a scale. That's why I've never really been that much interested in money other than enough to do my work. But now, you know, thinking that there needs to be a way of bringing the vast populations of people into the process of restoration, and using these new solutions. I invented a technology which is in the book Healing Earth, which is called an oasis eco machine, to allow one to go right into the middle of an arid desert and start creating ecosystems, and within them economic systems. So it's mind-boggling what I think we can start thinking about, and all we need is lots of people like Greg to make it happen.
Yeah. So yeah, that's really interesting and really inspiring. Because also one of the questions, of course, everybody asks is, and also one of our participants have asked is, do we have time to look at things in a way that, or do we have time to be patient, really? I think that my personal, but you know, I'll also ask this to Greg. I think one of the things that John has really hit upon here and also described is how important it is to look at nature. And of course, his whole career has been about using nature, or not using nature, but being inspired by nature, and really looking at the way in which ecosystems function, and how can we mimic that, but also how can we use it to in our human society and economy to be more in tune with nature instead of how we are living now. But of course, this takes time to understand. Greg, do you want to?
Just real quick, yes, it does take time, but it also takes sort of people and collective wisdom and creativity. So I'm going to like do something real. There's another tool out there, and I think sometimes we don't understand sort of the full power of some of the things that are being proposed. So I'm going to throw one out there: basic income. Usually you talk about basic income, and it is looked at as an economic tool. I mean, that's how people, Dr. Martin Luther King looked at it. That's how, you know, presidential candidates look at it. But there are others who all, and not maybe exclusively, but people like Fuller and others saw another aspect of basic income, and that it was a tool for unleashing creativity and providing some freedom for people to do things that they might not otherwise be able to do. It doesn't provide enough, at least the proposals, to, you know, maybe support someone fully, but the idea, one of the main ideas, is that it could allow artists and some scientists and others. I said, if I could, there are things I'd like to pursue, but at least I've got to be able to feed myself and pay rent, and maybe I get a part-time job. Basic income really does have the potential for making up some time by giving more and more people the freedom if they choose to use it. It's not saying, and here's the interesting thing, and someone calculated in saying that clearly some people are going out and they're going to like abuse it, or they're going to do one thing or another. If only a small percentage of folks use that to do some things that they would not otherwise been able to do, it could make a difference. And I'm not saying that's the only thing, but I'm just sort of saying that we've got to look at some of these strategies that are being proposed and not do what we accuse others to do, just have this linear approach to understanding what the goal is and what they can achieve, and to step back and say, boy, that could do a lot more. So yes, we are running out of time. Time is part of the factor, but the other factor is how do we unleash the creativity and imagination and of so many people who would like to be able to contribute to solving the problems?
Yes. This is, yeah. So for example, basic income, and also there's a lot of ideas out there that we could use for, and one of them also is of course biomimicry. This is one of the questions that came from the participants as well, is how do you see biomimicry working from both of your work and also from your backgrounds? I know that John, of course, his work is all about biomimicry and ecomimicry, but maybe you could start for the people who would like to understand how that's kind of related to each other.
You know, it's interesting. There is a large body of knowledge that's coalescing. We have a discipline called permaculture, and it's around the world. It began in Australia, but around the world, it is very definitely influencing. And then when it comes to biomimicry, it really started out by Janine Benyus basically saying, what is it that organisms know that we need to know to solve our problems? And I think one of her mentors was an abalone. Here is an animal that makes high-class ceramics at ambient temperature, sea temperature, using minerals found in salt water and genetic information to create ceramics. Whereas we humans, we use thousands of degrees of heat, sometimes toxic chemicals, to create, and a lot of energy to create our own ceramics. Why can't we learn from the abalone to do it in a way that doesn't harm the planet? That's the sort of kind of basic, initial Janine Benyus website. Insight. And I like the fact that all of these disciplines are not disciplines, sub bodies of knowledge are beginning to talk to each other, perhaps the first time as equals. Whether you're a biodynamic farmer or a large scale food cropper, and one thing I add, the one I was talking about for the oceans, is the remineralization, which is really pioneered. I think all of these should be part of the palette. All of these disciplines should be pigments in the paintings we're all trying to make, because they all have a lot to teach. And biomimicry now is moving out into ecological into ecological restoration and other things. I work with a woman in South Africa who heads biomimicry in South Africa, and she is very, very sensitive to the large ecological issues, and is really learning how to use the sensibility of biomimicry in environmental restoration, and I think we're going to see more of that all over the place. And I was very fortunate that Janine wrote the introduction to my book, and I'm very honored that she did that, because I think the world of her and the organization.
Great. Yes, you can see that all of these things are coming together, and also a lot about regeneration. I think that instead of talking about sustainable society, we're now talking about regenerative society. So how do we move from sustaining what we have towards regenerating, really? And that's also what your work is all about, isn't it, John? Restoring and regenerating. I also wanted to ask Greg, because I meet a lot of young people nowadays that when I started out 20 years ago, and it can't be different for you, maybe it was, maybe I was also at a time where environment wasn't very popular as well, working on environmental issues. But what I find now is that we have so many bright young people in their 20s who are, more and more of them are getting into environment. People who maybe in the past would choose for a corporate job are now going into environmental work. And because they see how important it is, and also into activism as well. And of course, basic income, one of the things that could be very important for these young people. Do you, either of you have, or both of you have, a message to young people at this time?
Do you mind if I say something?
Of course, yeah.
In your country, Holland, a foundation was created called Common Lands, which you know all about. And there they are trying to create, going to parts of the world that have been ecologically devastated, Spain, South Africa, a number of different places. And they're creating, I think the word they use are camp villages, and bringing young people from all over the world to work together as a community to take these lands that have been abandoned by prior residents and bringing them back to life. And they're working with the local people who've remained in these areas. And it strikes me, I mean, this is only one part of the puzzle, but it strikes me what a remarkable thing to learn the earth healing skills in a community of people from many different backgrounds, and not only learn these skills, but communicate with each other as to where you're going to go next to continue this work that you're doing with Common Lands. I like that model. I think that these villages that primary mission is to heal the earth will be popping up everywhere. And I also have a feeling, and again, this is completely unrealistic, that the world is going to fund them. They're going to see how much genius is being unleashed on the landscape.
I think that's true. I would say that's true. A word of caution, though, in terms about who can take advantage of this, in terms of who has the means to be able to do this. I've looked at once again the wealth gap. When I got involved in the environment, people often ask me, why aren't there more blacks involved? And I can tell you, because I've talked to friends, Jimmy Hoyt and others who said, I can't make enough money doing that. I've been forced to try to figure out how I can get into a career. And most of the environmental jobs were nonprofits. They didn't offer a lot. The other part of that, though, is sort of the access. So I'm going to agree with John, but I'm going to sort of say I think that's what's so important about the urban agriculture movement. When I taught high school in 1978 as part of South Boston High School's desegregation program, and the schools were thrown on receivership, forced integration, had whites and blacks at each other's throats, and there was money to set up alternative programs. And we got money to set up a program, and this is in Boston Harbor Island, called Thompson Island. 157 acres, was once a farming school, and only 15-minute boat ride from Long Wharf to Thompson Island. Beautiful agricultural land. Then it became a reform school, then it was taken over privately. We got it, and we were working with young people, 30 from South Boston High School, which was sort of the epicenter of the forced busing. It was a white neighborhood that resisted busing, and we brought 30 kids from Dorchester and Roxbury who were black. And one of the programs we initiated was a urban was in agriculture. When we reclaimed the land, we did composting. At that time, and this was 1978, blacks, nope, farming, slavery, plantation, nothing to do with me. I'm not at all interested. So that was sort of an interesting that was 1978. Now, you know, jettison ahead to 2020 with Leah Pullman and people at, you know, Soulfire and at Karen Washington and others doing both rural farming, but also the urban farming piece. Why is that important? It's because, and this again, looking at the wealth gap, because there's technology, but then there's some embedded stuff that we have to deal with, right? In terms of housing and discrimination in terms of housing and access to land and that wealth gap. Let me just make one point about the wealth gap. Boston Globe did a study of a special section a couple of years ago. They showed that the average net worth of a non-immigrant African-American family in Boston, median net worth, $8. E-I-G-H-T, dollars. The net worth of white families in Boston, the median net worth, $247,000. $247,000 and $8. That $8, you've got to go back, and I'm just sort of saying this is where you got to do a little bit of history, read books like the power of the color of law, look at the things that are on the books, the laws that prevent that, but also look at the land that was legally stolen from black farmers in the South. And so we're at a point now where 98% of the agricultural land in the United States belongs to whites. 98%. So how do black and African American people of color get an understanding and want to be inspired by this? It's urban agriculture right now. I'm not entirely, but and so that negative sort of reaction to agriculture has changed dramatically among people of color, because we do see the power of being able to grow, right, and take and use nature's bounty. So I just wanted sort of that caveat that there's some, I think you're absolutely right, and we've got to do that, but there's some underlying issues that we need to address to make sure that as many people as possible can take advantage of those types of programs and have access to it. Can I just say one quick, I know a lot of questions, but just on this biomimicry sort of thing, because that I don't sort of work in sort of the biomimicry in terms of some of the really exciting work in terms of the design and looking at models from nature, but I do think that there are, I would call a biomimicry of systems, and I'm probably going to get in trouble with Janine and others about this, but looking at Gaia and the Earth as a whole, and looking at the dynamism that's created, and talk about regeneration from the fact that it's a sphere and that half of it's in sunlight, half of it's in darkness, and so you set up these temperature differentials, and and so you get this dynamism that's on the planet. And the reason I'm bringing it up real quick, because I get a little worried when I hear people talk about how renewable energy can address the climate crisis. That what we need to do, because the economics is coming around, is just build more wind turbines and build more solar panels, and we're going to solve the problem. The Netherlands, as some of you have seen, came out with a study recently and said that we can't meet our renewable energy goals because there are not enough metals. There's not enough resources for us. If every country tries to go it alone and meet the goals, we're not going to do it. There has got to be this an incredible, unprecedented level of global cooperation. Maybe it's not totally unprecedented. It certainly seems distant today, given where we're at in this country in terms of our cooperation and collaboration with other countries. But we've got to take the sort of the systems biomimicry of symbiotic relationships, cooperation. And once again, in 1970, with Jimmy Carter, Leonid Brezhnev, Pierre Trudeau, Bucky Fuller sort of addressed them and said, you know what? There's one way we're going to be able to support renewables and address some of the problems that we're having, and that is you've got to build a world grid. You've got to build a grid, because right now when you think about solar, you think about wind, all one of the major concerns that people have is with the intermittent sort of aspect of wind and solar locally, right? The sun doesn't always shine locally. The wind doesn't always flow locally. But their wind is always blowing somewhere and the sun is always shining. And if there could be a system that could connect grids, renewables, wind, could be on land, could be offshore, could be floating solar, could be, and in a way that takes advantage of the where the sun is shining, where the wind is flowing, and do that in a way that still honors and incorporates microgrids. Because all I want to say here, it's another one of those false dichotomies. It's not global versus local. It's where's the integration? How do we integrate sort of the global with the local, and that also means regional, and do it in a way that, again, can create, I'll use the term of the world game, create a world that works for everybody. So I think that there's that mimicry on that level and that scale as well. And you've got to be just a little careful about just saying that in globalization in this regard, John and I have had some conversation about this. The new globalization has got to be, globalization's got to mean cooperation, not domination. So I just want to sort of put that out there, because the earth works because it is a whole system and it is big, and it does, only use the incoming, right? For the most part, that incoming source of energy from the sun, but it works, and it's been doing it for what now, about 4 billion years, hasn't grown much, a little bit stuff comes in, but it has, but here's what I'm saying, but it has developed, right? It's rearranged, it's taken what's there and rearranged, and what that means to a certain extent is some species come and some species go, but if you do believe in Gaia, the goal is to maintain the conditions necessary for life, which Gaia has certainly done, I think, pretty well, even with us.
Yeah, and Greg, I think one of the things you mentioned just now, also about how do we create more possibilities also for young people, and in this country as well, there's a big problem with land prices, for example. Also for farmers who want to farm who want to do agroecology, do not have access to land, and the same as you just said in African American population, also and all marginalized groups in the world are having problem with access to land, and the same also goes for access to land for renewable projects in general. How do we address that issue?
Well, I think, that's probably the $24 billion question, but I think that the work that Susan and folks at the center is beginning to try to get at that, right, with the not just the community land trust, but the strategies for gifting land. And I know that's not a permanent answer, but you've got to bring all your tools into the toolkit. And let me just even, in an example, I was commissioner of agriculture twice, right? 20 years apart, but back around 1990 to 93, and then again 2014. But the state had put together a program to try to create to prevent farming from vanishing in the Commonwealth. We were losing farms at an alarming rate at the end of the Second World War, right up to the 70s, when then Commissioner Fred Winthrop put together a Blue Ribbon Commission. And he said, we got to do something. The land is hemorrhaging. We're not going to be farming in Massachusetts much longer. And most of the general public was sort of nonchalant about it. Well, you know what? So we import from California or from South America. Back then, we're a small state. We don't have very long growing season. We'll focus on the high tech and we'll let other people grow our food. Fortunately, Winthrop was commissioner at the time. He said no. One of the things he did was implement something called the Agricultural Preservation Restriction Program. We purchased the development rights of farms that were farming on prime agricultural land. And basically we put a restriction. We purchased the right to develop the land, keep it in agriculture. The farmer maintained the land, but he or she understood that it could only be used for farming. So that obviously had an impact on the value of the land, but we paid them cold cash. And the cash was the difference between the development value of the land and its agricultural land, and they could do whatever they wanted to. $100 million or more or less has been invested in that program over the years. And I forget, 80-some thousand, lots of acres of land. Farmers are getting old, and they're finding that their kids are, many of them, like it used to be that pattern where the kids would take over the farm. These days, that's not necessarily the case. A lot of the kids said they've gone off to college, they're going to do something else. We see how hard it is. We don't want to do that. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that we've got like a lot of land that is committed to farming, and we're not sure who's going to be able to farm that. So here's an opportunity for a program where we might be able to start doing some matchmaking with potential young farmers who have developed the skills and want to farm. And here's this beautiful prime agricultural land with no farmers. And clearly you can't just make it happen. There's got to be trust building. There's got to be lots of protocols. But all I'm saying is there are some, I don't know how many other states have a similar situation, but I'm going now just based on experience. But I do think there are some opportunities to try to get, to match potential young farmers with landless young farmers with farms for folks who are no longer able to farm and perhaps would love to see responsible farmers on that land. So just a couple of examples, and I'm sure there are probably more.
This is also in Europe, this is also a big issue at the time. So I guess all over the world as well. John and Greg, have you got a question for each other that you would like to ask?
Well, can I say, I probably do, but I'm looking, we got a ton of questions on, they're like about, there are about 40 questions. I could ask John, but I think they're
fed to me through the Schumacher Center team.
Oh, you're getting them already? Okay.
But I haven't had those 40 questions. But what would you want to ask each other first? John.
Stay healthy, Greg. Can't check out for a long time.
No,
a question. That would be.
I have a question. I think you may have answered this, John, but and you alluded to it. You're dealing with incredibly complex systems, like right? You're talking, waters, and many of them are suffering from who knows how many different assaults, right? Chemicals and other things. You have, in your book, Living Earth, you don't give away all your secrets, but it is a really good guide to helping people understand this process that you've used, and for lack of a better way of stating it, where you're inoculating some of these troubled bodies of water with healthy waters, but you can't know everything. What in your experience and your 3 PhDs, I had to get that in over the years, that how do you know when you've understood enough and you can feel confident that the process is going to work? I mean, obviously you're turning it over to nature, but can you just speak to that? Because I don't know how you deal with the complexity and then are able to make the kind of successful success that you've done.
There is no way any human could ever understand the complexity in one of our eco machines, for example. And we'll always be learning more about them, but we'll never get there because nature is so complex, so mysterious, so symbiotic, so competitive, so cooperative. All these things are going on. But there are some sweet rules of thumb. One is when you're designing a living technology, make sure that you include representative species from all the kingdoms of life. That's the first thing. The second thing is to optimize the amount of sunshine that can get to these communities. That's the sweet key. And then thirdly is to make sure that there are wild parent systems for your living technology. For example, a marsh, a stream, a pond, a wet hollow in the woods, that all of these have some part in your technological innovation. So basically what you're doing is you're tapping in to nature's self-organizing principles. Now you're tapping into all of them that have been, trial and erroring and working for over 3 billion years, to create what we have, the mysterious world we have today. And that's how those of us with relatively modest knowledge of complex systems can put together and assemble complex systems that can help serve humanity. And I think all the kingdoms of life, parent ecosystems, at least 3 or 4, sunshine, 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 that's what drives so much on the planet. And you've got a pretty good recipe with just that. Whether you're growing foods, creating fuels, treating wastes, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Healing environments.
Can I bring up one other little thing? I don't know if you have other questions, but it seems that there's still that lingering question too about how much time do we have, sense of urgency, scaling. And I know that, and I don't want to give too much away here, but in talking with John and his colleagues, they talk about a strategy, and I think it's an important strategy to talk about as they're working on these important projects. So, you know, restoring the health and resilience of water systems and landscape, ecological landscape restoration. They clearly sort of have in mind, we need some iconic projects. We need something that if people can see that this work, I mean, because you're doing a lot of work. A lot of work happens and it goes unseen and unknown, except for the local. This is a little bit of that global and local stuff, because it is local. That's what you do, right? You're working in a place, but sometimes it just doesn't make it to the general consciousness in a way that could be transformative. But if you have some of these large challenges, I take the book of, the Healing Earth and the greening of the Sinai. I mean, that sounds like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Well, that is sort of the response that you want, right? Because if that's the response that's initial, and then you're able to achieve it, you're going to get attention. And you're going to start to get people saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we do know how to do some things that we weren't aware of. And so I think, once again, there's a reason why there's got to be that place-based, on the ground. We're doing stuff in a community. We're going to learn from that. One of my favorite books, the title at any rate, is Why Big Fierce Animals Are Rare. Now, didn't say why they don't exist. It said that we've got those big mothers out there. They're big, but they are few. But they're also essential to, right, sort of the integrity of the system. And I kind of see that we've got sort of the know-how and the knowledge to tackle it. But John will point out, and maybe right after this, but those large iconic projects are going to really still take resources. They will take considerable resources to be able to make happen. But the payoff in terms of sort of the contributing to whatever we want to call it, a paradigm shift, a transformation in the way that we see the systemic changes, are really pretty great. So I just think that a strategy like that, and not that that's the only one, we've got to put something like those in place, and we've got to get them supported so that we can take advantage of the time that we have. I guess that's all I would say about time. We don't know when it exactly runs out, but we can't keep saying every 10 years that we've got another 10 years, right? At some point, that just doesn't wash.
John, did you have a question for Greg, or otherwise we'll move on to the concluding remark?
I'll just be very quick and try and add to what Greg said. When I originally proposed restoring the 1.25 million acres of Appalachia that had been destroyed by coal mining, the only way I could get a social system to work that could access the billions of dollars of money it would take to reclaim over 1 million acres was to propose cooperative organizations under the cooperative laws of this country that would enable institutions to be formed which could bring large numbers of people into a share position in this vast enterprise. And the legal structures which exist for cooperatives allows them to be able to access significant amounts of money if it's done correctly. And so I think the idea of cooperatives may be the missing link, and it may be possible that for example, young landless farmers could create a cooperative which could then acquire rather vast tracts of land. I mean, in places like Kansas, land where the soil is blown away and a few other things, can be bought at almost a pittance. And as we know now, we can bring those lands back into production in a matter of 5 years. So I think we've got the tools to create a new Homestead Act, if you will, for North America. Sorry, didn't mean to take up much time.
Well, thanks. That's really inspiring to hear, and also I think so important, not just for North America, but the whole of the world. Also, as we're coming to the end, I would like to ask you both if you have any concluding remarks that would offer, hope or direction or a vision in these troubled times for the future. And how far are we in reinventing the future? Are we?
Greg, do you want to start?
I mean, I guess I'm going to go back to my my where have we come since the 1997 lecture, right? The wisdom that builds communities, and I think that wisdom that resides in communities, and particularly the one that I had the honor to work with, Dudley Street, was immense. Part of it was because of its diversity, of its multiculturalism, and we had multicultural fairs every year. The sort of thing that is now sort of looked at as a threat by some factors in this country, the threat of multiculturalism. But I think that part of the process that we're going to have to figure out, and we did this at Dudley Street, was how we pull together experts in fields with experienced non-experts, who are the people who live in communities but are still experienced. I think in the one opening part of Bucky's major work, Synergetics, he says that science is from his point of view, at least that he said, science is the act of trying to set in order the facts of experience. And we all have experience. And he always felt that every individual in living out our lives, we actually employ the general principles in the universe. Someone mentioned scale. The scale of the general principles of operating universe, tension, whatever, or the leverage, right? It's scalable. That principle of leverage applies to the smallest, actually probably nanotechnology, as well as the universe itself. As we become more and more in tune with what those principles are, we get a better, collectively, we then sort of have the inventory to address the problems that I think are facing us. And that may sound academic, and it may sound too intellectual, and this whole idea of systems, but here's what I'll leave you with. Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, again, poor, African-American, Latino, Cape Verdean, white, common denominator, poor. But if I could take you back, and I know it's in some of the films, Holding Ground, and you look at them talking about systems. They were systems thinkers. And they didn't have all the sophisticated computer software, but I think we probably alone, during the 4 years I was at Dudley, we kept the Post-it people alive, because there were Post-its everywhere, on the walls, and with ideas and lines going from here to there. but it really was systems thinking. And it was, and it was honoring the experiences and the different cultures and perspectives that people brought to it, and the patience that they had. Because I will tell you now, because the patience meant that we had to bridge those cultural gaps. Latino community, many of them said, "What do you mean we don't own the land? What's this community land trust? I want to own the land. You don't just tell me." And we had to honor that reticence and that doubt, but talk to them about that and start talking about community wealth. And it took time. And again, I keep going back to the question that people said, how much time do we have? We have as much time as we have, I guess. And but you can't compromise. I just don't think you can compromise the process. I think that's part of the problem that we're facing today, is that people don't like to be told that this is, and they maybe don't even trust that. So that self-discovery has got to be a part of what we do, and that's where sort of, but this will be the last, and I don't want to take, Bucky built structures, the geodesic dome, but he built one structure. It was called a Tensegrity Structure. It was mostly wires, what he called, and then you had some solid struts, but most were connected by these thin wires, and the solid pieces never touch one another. But you would get these very strong structures in the end. But here's the deal. You start putting this together, and the wire here, and here's this, and the wire here, and you're getting frustrated. You could be 97% complete, and it's still a floppy mess. But then you put that next strut in place, and it comes into being. And what happens is, as a society and as humans, we get to that 97% where it's still a floppy mess, and we say it's a failure and we give up. And we could be one strut away. That's the way systems work. They don't just, and so we could be that one strut away. And that's where your intuition and your experience has got to say, you got to keep going. It looks like we're very far away. We are right on the cusp.
Fantastic. John, would you like to add to that? Have you got some concluding remarks?
I don't really. What I would like to recommend you do is post the 47 questions on the website, so that I could learn from it.
Yeah, we will. We'll send them to you, and maybe we could somehow also, maybe somehow you could also look if you can answer them. But we'll get them to you for sure. Yeah. So, anything that raises your spirits, Todd, in these at this time? Things that make you happy, or
I think what's going on this afternoon.
Yeah.
We're able to have a conversation, and everybody who's listening to us today is, busy wanting to get out in the garden so they could deadhead the weeds or something.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
At least keep talk ratios in order.
Thanks.
It's been a real.
Thank you, Natasha. You did a wonderful job. Thank you for keeping us under control.
Yeah. Thank you both. It's been fantastic, and I wish we had all day to talk. But like you said, people are probably wanting to get into the garden or wherever. So I just wanted to thank you both very much for joining us, and thanks to the Schumacher team also for setting this up and sending us the questions. I'll get you both the questions through as well.
And it's getting late for you.
Yeah, it's getting dark now. I have to turn on the lights. It's 9:30 here in Amsterdam. Where are you both, actually?
Bless you. We're both on Cape Cod.
Yeah, both of you.
I'm about 7 minutes. We're 7 minutes away from each other.
So you can go and visit each other in a minute.
Oh, we do. Yes.
So yeah, I just wanted to say thanks on behalf, and also I wanted to tell all the participants that they can see also this recording or send it on. It will be on the Schumacher website. And also, if you're interested in any of the other conversations that are going to be happening from now until October, they'll also be posted on the Schumacher website. and also the previous call. So you can register or you can watch them on YouTube later. Thanks everyone for joining us, especially of course Greg and John, and I hope to have a conversation with you soon, both of you again, and well, have a nice day, and
stay safe and healthy.